Marcus froze against the chain-link door, his calloused hands still gripping the cold metal. The woman's voice seemed to drift from everywhere and nowhere at once, like an echo bouncing off the concrete walls. He squinted into the darkness beyond the rows of empty oil drums and rusted motorcycle frames. "Hello?" His voice came out rougher than intended. "Look, lady, I don't know how you got in here, but we need to call the cops. There's gotta be another way out." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the desert wind threading through broken glass. Marcus fumbled for his phone's flashlight, the weak beam cutting through shadows that seemed too thick for an October night. The garage stretched deeper than he remembered. 40 feet of concrete floor stained black with years of motor oil, transmission fluid, and God knew what else. He'd been 16 the last time he stood in this place. 16 and stupid, following Diego around like a lost puppy, desperate to prove himself worthy of the Hellrider's patch. Now, at 28, Marcus had built a different life. Construction work that paid honest money, a small apartment in Fresno where nobody knew the Rodriguez name, where his hands fixed things instead of breaking them. But Bakersfield had a way of dragging you back. "The door behind you. It's not the only way," the woman said, closer now. Marcus spun the flashlight beam toward her voice and caught a glimpse of movement near the back wall. A figure in white, pale and ethereal in the phone's harsh light. They never found all the tunnels Diego dug. He was always planning escapes, wasn't he? Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "What did you say?" "Your brother." He knew this day would come. The woman stepped into the light, and Marcus nearly dropped his phone. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back and a belly swollen with pregnancy. Her clothes looked strange. A white dress that seemed too clean for this grimy place, too thin for the October cold seeping through the broken windows. He knew you'd have to face what happened here. "You're talking crazy." Marcus backed against the door, the chain rattling. "Diego died 15 years ago. Car accident on Highway 58. The pregnant woman tilted her head, studying him with eyes that seemed older than her face. "Is that what you tell yourself? That it was an accident?" The garage seemed to pulse around them, shadows shifting like living things. Marcus caught the scent of something underneath the motor oil, something metallic and wrong. His stomach churned as memories he'd buried started clawing their way to the surface. Diego's voice, angry and desperate that last night. The sound of gunshots echoing off concrete walls. The choice Marcus had made that changed everything. "Who are you?" he whispered. "My name is Elena." She placed both hands on her belly, a protective gesture that looked rehearsed. "And I need your help to remember why I'm here. Why we're both here. We're here because my construction crew thought it would be hilarious to lock Tank Rodriguez in his dead brother's garage on Halloween night." The words came out bitter. He'd worked so hard to shed the Tank nickname, to become just Marcus, a guy who showed up on time, did his job, and didn't cause trouble. But somehow his past had leaked out anyway, probably through Tommy Valdez, who'd grown up in East Bakersfield, and remembered the Rodriguez brothers' reputation. Elena shook her head slowly. "You think this is coincidence? That your friends just happened to choose this place?" She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the concrete. "Marcus, you've been running for 15 years, but some ghosts don't stay buried." The phone's battery was dying, the flashlight beam growing weaker. Marcus tried to steady his breathing, to think rationally. There had to be an explanation. Maybe Elena was homeless, squatting in the abandoned garage. Maybe she was high, or mentally ill, or just desperate enough to hide out here despite the Hellrider's reputation for violence. But how did she know about Diego's tunnels? How did she know his real name when everyone called him Tank? "Look, Elena, I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm not interested." Marcus turned back to the chain-link door, testing its strength. The metal was old but solid, the padlock new. His crew had planned this carefully. "I'm getting us out of here, and then you can tell your story to the police." "The tunnels, Marcus." Elena's voice carried a strange urgency. "Check the back wall, behind the old tool cabinet. Diego left something for you." "Diego didn't leave me anything. Diego's been dead since I was 16. Then how do I know about the scar on your shoulder?" The one you got when you tried to stop him from killing that DEA agent? Marcus spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. The garage fell silent except for the wind and the distant sound of semi-trucks on Highway 58. Elena watched him with those two knowing eyes, waiting. In the dying phone light, Marcus saw that she was right about one thing. There was a tool cabinet against the back wall, exactly where she'd said it would be. Marcus stared at the tool cabinet, his phone's dying light casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive and employed for the past 12 years, screamed that this was impossible. Elena couldn't know about the scar. He'd never told anyone how he got it. Not his parole officer, not his therapist at the county rehab program, not even Maria. Especially not Maria. The thought of her hit him like a physical blow. She'd be expecting him home by now, probably had dinner waiting, something simple but carefully prepared. The way she did everything. Rice and beans, maybe chicken if her last paycheck from the diner had stretched far enough. Maria, who worked double shifts to help him save for the ring he'd hidden in the coffee can behind the flour. Maria, who deserved so much better than a man with blood under his fingernails and 15 years of lies between them. "You're thinking about her," Elena said softly. "The woman who loves you despite what you've done." Marcus's hands clenched into fists. "Stay out of my head." She doesn't know about Diego, does she? About what really happened that night? The phone's flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Marcus cursed under his breath, shaking the device, but the battery was gone. Pale moonlight filtered through the broken windows, barely enough to make out shapes in the gloom. He'd been so careful for so long. After his release from juvenile detention, he'd moved to Fresno, picked up construction work with a crew that didn't ask too many questions about your past as long as you could swing a hammer and show up sober. He'd told Maria he'd had some trouble as a kid, nothing specific, just enough truth to explain the 6-year gap in his work history. She'd accepted it because that's who she was, someone who believed people could change if they really wanted to. And Marcus had wanted to. God, how he'd wanted to. What kind of life is that? Elena's voice drifted through the darkness. Built on lies? A better life than I had here, Marcus shot back. I've got steady work, an apartment with my name on the lease. I pay my taxes, I don't carry a weapon, I haven't thrown a punch in 3 years. That's something. Is it enough? The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus thought about his morning routine. Alarm at 5:30, coffee and toast, while Maria got ready for her early shift at the diner, a quick kiss goodbye before he climbed into his battered Ford pickup. The drive to whatever job site they were working, listening to talk radio and trying not to think about the past. 8 hours of honest work under the sun, his hands building instead of destroying. Then home to Maria's smile and whatever dinner she'd managed to scrape together, maybe an hour of television before bed. Simple. Clean, safe. But lately, he'd started waking up at 3 a.m. with his heart racing and sweat cooling on his skin. Dreams of concrete walls and the smell of blood. Dreams of Diego's voice echoing through tunnels that shouldn't exist. Dreams of choices that couldn't be undone. The nightmares are getting worse, Elena observed. Marcus didn't deny it. There was no point. Somehow this woman knew things she shouldn't know, saw things she shouldn't see. I've been clean for 12 years. No drugs, no violence, no hell riders. I'm not that kid anymore. But you're not fully alive either, are you? When was the last time you told someone the complete truth about yourself? The truth? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is, I was 16 years old when I watched my brother murder a federal agent in cold blood. The truth is, I could have stopped it, and I didn't. The truth is, I spent 6 years in juvenile detention for obstruction of justice because I was too much of a coward to testify against the Hell Riders. You want me to put that on Maria? You want me to destroy the one good thing in my life? Elena moved closer, her white dress rustling in the darkness. What if keeping the secret destroys it instead? Marcus thought about the ring in the coffee can, about the proposal he'd been planning for Christmas morning. About the look in Maria's eyes sometimes when she thought he wasn't watching, like she was waiting for him to finally trust her with whatever he was carrying. About the way she'd stopped asking questions about his family, his childhood, the years before they met. Maybe she already knew he was lying. Maybe she was just waiting for him to be brave enough to tell the truth. "The tool cabinet, Marcus," Elena whispered. "Diego left something for you, something that might set you both free." In the moonlight, Marcus could see his breath misting in the cold air. His phone was dead. His crew wouldn't be back until morning, and somehow he wasn't alone in this place of ghosts and buried secrets. He took a step toward the tool cabinet. The tool cabinet loomed before Marcus like a headstone in the pale moonlight. Each step across the oil-stained concrete felt like walking through quicksand, his work boots heavy with the weight of 15 years' worth of buried memories. The cabinet was older than he remembered, red paint peeling like dried blood, the metal handles worn smooth by countless hands. Behind him, Elena's breathing had become labored, quick gasps that echoed off the concrete walls. When he glanced back, she was gripping her swollen belly, her face contorted in pain. "You okay?" "Just contractions," she whispered. "They've been coming all day." "But this is more important." Marcus stopped cold. "Contractions? Jesus Christ, you're in labor? We need to get you to a hospital." "Not yet." Elena's voice carried a strange authority despite her obvious pain. "First, the cabinet. Diego's message. It changes everything." "I don't give a damn about Diego's message. You're about to have a baby in an abandoned garage." Marcus pulled out his dead phone, swearing at the black screen. "My crew won't be back until morning. We need to find another way out now." But Elena was already moving past him, her bare feet silent on the concrete. She pressed both hands against the cabinet's right side, pushing with surprising strength for someone in her condition. The heavy metal unit shifted with a grinding screech, revealing a gap behind it. "Help me," she gasped. Against his better judgment, Marcus grabbed the cabinet's left edge. Together, they muscled it away from the wall, exposing what lay behind, a section of concrete that looked different from the rest. Newer, deliberately placed to hide something. Elena ran her fingers along the wall until she found what she was looking for, a loose section that shifted under pressure. Behind it was a metal box, the kind used to store important documents. She pulled it free and handed it to Marcus. "Open it." Marcus's hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, yellowed with age but still clear enough to make his blood run cold. The first showed Diego shaking hands with a man in a DEA windbreaker. Agent Wilson, the federal agent who'd been found dead in this very garage 15 years ago. But Diego was smiling in the photo, and Wilson was smiling back. The second photograph showed Wilson handing Diego an envelope thick with cash. "That's impossible," Marcus breathed. "Diego killed Wilson. I was here. I saw it happen. Keep looking." The third photograph was a surveillance shot taken through the garage's front window. It showed three figures, Diego, Wilson, and a third man whose face made Marcus's world tilt sideways. Tommy Valdez, the same Tommy Valdez who worked Marcus's construction crew, who Dee suggested locking him in the Hell Rider's garage as a Halloween prank. But in this 15-year-old photograph, Tommy was younger, wearing the leather jacket of a rival motorcycle club, and he was pointing a gun at Wilson's head while Diego stepped backward, hands raised in surrender. "Diego was never the killer," Elena said softly. "He was working with Wilson, feeding him information about Hell Rider's operations. Tommy murdered Wilson and framed your brother for it. Then he killed Diego to keep him quiet." Marcus's legs gave out. He sank to his knees on the concrete, photographs scattered around him like fallen leaves. Everything he'd believed about that night, about his brother, about his own cowardice, all of it was a lie. "How do you know this?" he whispered. Elena was leaning against the wall now, her breathing rapid and shallow. Another contraction was building. "Because Tommy killed me too. 3 months ago when I found these photographs in Wilson's old case files, I was an investigative journalist. I'd been tracking cold cases, following leads about corrupt federal agents." Marcus looked up at her, understanding creeping through him like ice water. "You're dead." "I'm something between dead and alive. Stuck here until the truth comes out." Elena's face was pale with pain, but her eyes remained focused. "Tommy's been watching you for years, Marcus. He got himself hired on your construction crew specifically to keep tabs on you. And tonight, Tonight he brought you back here to finish what he started." As if summoned by her words, the sound of an engine rumbled outside the garage. Headlights swept across the broken windows, casting moving shadows on the walls. A car door slammed. "Marcus?" Tommy Valdez's voice called from outside. "Hey man, sorry about the prank. Crew sent me back to let you out early." Elena gripped Marcus's arm with surprising strength. "He's not here to help you. He knows you found the photographs. This was always the plan. Bring you back here where Diego died, make it look like an accident, close the loop forever." The padlock on the front door rattled as Tommy worked to open it. Marcus had a choice to make, and he had seconds to make it: trust the word of a dead woman and prepare to fight for his life, or believe his coworker had come to rescue him and walk straight into a trap 15 years in the making. The lock clicked open. The photographs lay scattered at Marcus's feet, like pieces of a shattered mirror, each one reflecting a truth that made his stomach clench with 15 years of misplaced guilt. His hands shook as he stared at the image of Tommy Valdez. Younger, leaner, but unmistakably the same man who'd suggested this Halloween prank with such casual enthusiasm. The same man now fumbling with keys just outside the door. "Marcus, you in there?" Tommy's voice carried false concern, the kind of tone Marcus had heard 1,000 times on construction sites when someone was about to get hurt and everyone pretended not to see it coming. "Sorry about the guys. You know how it is." Elena's grip on his arm tightened, her fingers ice cold despite the pregnancy radiating heat from her body. Another contraction was building. He could see it in the way her jaw clenched, the white-knuckled grip she had on her belly. But her eyes never left his face. "You have to choose," she whispered. "Trust what you know, or trust what you hope." Marcus's mind reeled between past and present, between the 16-year-old kid who'd watched his world explode and the 28-year-old man who'd spent 12 years building something clean from the wreckage. The rational part of his brain, the part that had learned to question everything, to think before acting, screamed that Elena couldn't be real. Dead people didn't give birth in abandoned garages. Dead people didn't hand you evidence that rewrote your entire history. But the photographs were real. The metal box was real, and Tommy Valdez's footsteps were getting closer to the door. "I don't know how to do this," Marcus breathed. The admission felt like swallowing glass. For 12 years, he'd built his new life on careful planning, on thinking 3 moves ahead, on never letting anyone push him into a corner. He'd learned to read job sites like chessboards, to spot trouble before it spotted him, to always have an exit strategy. But there was no exit strategy for ghosts. "You knew how once," Elena said. "The night Diego died, you tried to save him. You tried to stop what was happening. And I failed." The words came out raw. "I was 16 and stupid and scared, and I let my brother die because I couldn't pull a trigger fast enough." "You were 16 and brave and loyal, and you tried to stand between your brother and a killer." Elena's face contorted as another wave of pain hit her. "That boy, that scared, angry boy, he's still in there. He knows what to do." Outside, Tommy's keys clinked against the padlock. Any second now, the door would swing open, and Marcus would have to decide whether to smile and play grateful victim or prepare for a fight he wasn't sure he could win. His hands were soft now from construction work, not hardened by years of street violence. His reflexes had slowed. He'd spent so long learning to build instead of destroy that he wasn't sure he remembered how to do either effectively. And there was Maria to think about. If he died here tonight, she'd never know why. She'd spend the rest of her life believing he'd abandoned her, that all their plans and promises meant nothing. The ring in the coffee can would gather dust while she waited for answers that would never come. She'd probably blame herself somehow. Maria always did that, found ways to make other people's failures into her own shortcomings. But if he lived by trusting Tommy, by pretending ignorance about the photographs, would he really be living at all? He'd go back to Fresno carrying an even heavier load of secrets. He'd marry Maria knowing he'd been too much of a coward to face the truth about his brother's death. He'd spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, waiting for Tommy to decide he was still a threat. "The tunnels," Elena gasped, doubling over as the strongest contraction yet gripped her. Diego dug them as escape routes. Behind this wall there's a passage that leads to the old storm drain system. You could get away. Come back with help. Marcus looked at the wall she indicated, then at the photographs scattered around his feet. Evidence that could clear Diego's name, that could bring some measure of justice after 15 years of lies. Evidence that would disappear forever if Tommy found it. What about you? I can't leave you here in labor. Elena's smile was sad and knowing. I'm already dead, Marcus. But you're not, and neither is the truth. The padlock clicked open with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. Hinges creaked as Tommy pushed the door wide, his silhouette framed against the desert night. He had something in his right hand, a tire iron, Marcus realized, not the tools of rescue. Well, well, Tommy said, stepping into the garage with predatory grace. Looks like you found Diego's little treasure box. Marcus's hand closed around one of the photographs, the paper crackling between his fingers. His choice crystallized in that moment, sharp and clean as broken glass. He wasn't 16 anymore. But maybe it was time to remember what that 16-year-old boy had been willing to die for. Marcus rose slowly from his knees, the photograph of Tommy murdering Agent Wilson clutched in his right hand. 12 years of careful rehabilitation, of building a quiet life brick by brick, dissolved like morning mist. The man standing in the doorway wasn't his coworker anymore. Wasn't the guy who'd shared coffee and complained about overtime and ribbed him about getting married. This was the predator who'd destroyed his family and let him carry the guilt like a stone in his chest for 15 years. You son of a bitch, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. You killed them both. Tommy stepped fully into the garage, letting the door swing shut behind him. The tire iron caught the moonlight as he shifted his grip. Had to, hermano. Diego was getting soft, talking about coming clean. And that nosy reporter... He glanced at Elena, who was pressed against the wall, breathing hard through another contraction. She just couldn't leave well enough alone. The crew doesn't know, do they? Marcus was calculating distances now. 15 feet to Tommy, maybe 20 to the hidden tunnel Elena had mentioned. The photographs were scattered across the concrete between them like evidence at a crime scene. They really think this is just a prank. Course not. Good guys, salt of the earth, they'll feel terrible when they find your body tomorrow morning. Tommy took another step forward. Probably blame themselves for the rest of their lives. Tragic accident. Tank Rodriguez, trying to climb out through a broken window, slips and cracks his skull open. Poetic justice, really. Same garage where your piece of shit brother died. Something fundamental shifted in Marcus's chest. The careful walls he'd built around his anger, the meditation techniques his therapist had taught him, the breathing exercises that helped him stay calm when Maria's ex-boyfriend called drunk at 2 a.m. All of it crumbled. He thought of Diego's face that night 15 years ago, the confusion and betrayal as he realized he was being set up. The way his brother had looked at him in those final moments, not with disappointment, but with something worse, forgiveness. Diego was trying to do the right thing, Marcus said. Diego was a snitch who got cold feet. Tommy's smile was all teeth. Just like his little brother. I've been watching you for 3 years, Marcus. Nice quiet life you built in Fresno. Nice girl, too. Be a shame if something happened to her after you disappear. The mention of Maria's name was like touching a live wire. Marcus felt the last of his restraint snap, but instead of the wild rage that had gotten him in trouble as a teenager, something colder and more focused took its place. He'd learned things in 12 years of honest work, patience, planning, how to use leverage and timing instead of just brute force. Elena made a soft sound of pain, and both men looked toward her. She was sliding down the wall, her white dress pooling around her as she sank to the concrete. "The baby's coming," she gasped. I can't hold on much longer." "Jesus Christ," Tommy muttered. "This is getting weird, even for me." In that moment of distraction, Marcus moved. Not toward the tunnel, not toward escape, but forward, directly at Tommy. He'd learned something else in 12 years. Sometimes you had to go through hell to get to the other side. The tire iron swung in a vicious arc toward his head. Marcus ducked, feeling the wind of its passage, and drove his shoulder into Tommy's midsection. They hit the concrete hard, rolling between scattered photographs and old oil stains. Tommy was smaller but vicious, all elbows and knees and the desperate strength of a cornered animal. "You should have stayed gone," Tommy snarled, trying to bring the tire iron around again. Marcus grabbed his wrist, slamming it against the concrete until the weapon clattered away into the shadows. "I should have come back sooner." They rolled again, and now Marcus was on top, his hands closing around Tommy's throat. For a moment, just one moment, he felt the old darkness rise up in him. It would be so easy to squeeze until the struggling stopped, to end this the way it should have ended 15 years ago. But Elena's voice cut through the red haze. "The truth, Marcus. He's no good to anyone dead." Marcus loosened his grip, just enough for Tommy to gasp and curse. Behind them, Elena was making soft sounds of effort and pain, the unmistakable sounds of labor progressing whether anyone was ready or not. "You're going to tell them," Marcus panted. "The police, the FBI, whoever will listen. You're going to tell them what really happened to Diego and Agent Wilson." Tommy's laugh was breathless and bitter. "Like hell I am. Then we'll do this the hard way." Marcus glanced toward Elena, who was now on her hands and knees, her breathing coming in short, focused bursts, starting with getting her to a hospital. The garage door stood open behind them, showing nothing but desert darkness. But for the first time in 12 years, Marcus wasn't thinking about escape routes or exit strategies. He was thinking about going home. Tommy bucked beneath him, trying to throw Marcus off balance, but Marcus held firm. The man who'd spent 3 years sharing coffee and construction site gossip was gone, replaced by the killer who'd been hiding in plain sight. Marcus could feel his own grip slipping, not physically, but mentally. The familiar weight of violence, the way it simplified everything into a series of brutal calculations. "You don't have the stones," Tommy wheezed. "Just like that night. Just like when you watched Diego bleed out." The words hit like physical blows, but Marcus didn't let go. "Maybe not, but I'm not 16 anymore." Behind them, Elena's breathing shifted into a rhythm Marcus recognized from the birthing classes Maria had dragged him to last month. The slow, purposeful inhalations of someone managing pain that was about to get much worse. He couldn't process it, couldn't reconcile the impossible reality of a dead woman giving birth with everything his rational mind insisted was true. "Marcus," Elena's voice was strained but urgent. "Your phone. In your back pocket." "It's dead," he said, not taking his eyes off Tommy. "Check it." Still pinning Tommy with one hand, Marcus fumbled for his phone with the other. The screen that had been black for hours suddenly blazed to life, showing full bars and a battery at 90%. 3 missed calls from Maria, 2 from his foreman, and 17 unread messages. "That's impossible," he breathed. Elena's laugh was breathless with pain and something that might have been relief. "Impossible is relative when you're caught between worlds. Call 911. Both of us need help, but for very different reasons." Tommy thrashed harder, sensing opportunity in Marcus's distraction. "Nobody's going to believe a word of this. Dead reporters, ghost babies, you'll sound completely insane." But Marcus was already dialing, his thumbs steady despite everything. When the operator answered, he found his voice surprisingly calm. "I need police and paramedics at the old Hell Riders garage on Desert Wind Road. I have a suspect in 2 15-year-old murders and a woman in active labor. Sir, can you repeat that location?" Marcus rattled off the address, watching Tommy's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear. "And send backup. The suspect is still dangerous." After he hung up, the garage fell into a strange quiet broken only by Elena's controlled breathing and the distant sound of sirens already responding. Too fast for a normal call, Marcus realized, as if the emergency services had been waiting for this exact moment. "How long?" he asked Elena. "For me? Soon." She was gripping the wall now, her knuckles white. "For you? Your whole life has been leading to this moment. Everything that happened after Diego died. The guilt, the running, building a new life with Maria. It was all practice for right now." Tommy spat blood and tried once more to break free. "You think this changes anything? You think clearing Diego's name brings him back?" "No. Marcus said quietly. "But it means he didn't die for nothing." The sirens were getting closer now, their wailing echo bouncing off the desert hills. Marcus could see red and blue lights painting the horizon, at least 3 vehicles by his count. In minutes, this garage would be flooded with people, police, paramedics, maybe federal agents if Tommy's crimes were as extensive as they seemed. The photographs, Elena gasped between contractions. "Gather them up. Don't let them get lost in the chaos." Marcus looked down at Tommy, calculating whether he could safely let go long enough to collect the evidence. The smaller man's struggles were getting weaker, exhaustion taking the fight out of him. Or maybe something else. Maybe the weight of 15 years of lies finally catching up. "I should have killed you that night," Tommy said. "Should have put a bullet in your head right after Diego." "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "You should have." He released Tommy's throat and rolled away, trusting that the approaching sirens would keep the man from doing anything too stupid. Tommy sat up slowly, rubbing his neck, but made no move to run or fight. The photographs were scattered in a rough circle around them, like tarot cards predicting a future that had already been written. As Marcus gathered the evidence, he felt something shift in his chest. Not the crushing weight of guilt he'd carried for 15 years, but something lighter. Not quite forgiveness. He wasn't sure he'd ever forgive himself for not being strong enough to save Diego that night. But maybe understanding. Maybe the knowledge that some burdens weren't meant to be carried alone. The first police car pulled up outside, its headlights flooding the garage with harsh white light. Marcus looked at Elena one more time, but she was focused entirely inward now, her face a mask of concentration and pain. "Thank you," he said. She smiled without opening her eyes. "Thank me by going home to Maria." The garage door burst open, and Marcus raised his hands as armed officers poured in, their weapons drawn and voices shouting commands that echoed off the concrete walls. The reckoning had finally begun. The first officer through the door was young, maybe 25, with the kind of rigid posture that screamed rookie. His service weapon swept the garage in practiced arcs, while his partner, older, calmer, assessed the scene with experienced eyes. "Hands where I can see them," the rookie barked, his voice cracking slightly on the command. Marcus kept his arms raised, the photograph still clutched in his right fist. "I'm the one who called it in. Marcus Rodriguez. The suspect is Tommy Valdez, sitting against the wall. And we need paramedics for the woman, she's in labor." The older officer's gaze shifted to Elena, then back to Marcus, his brow furrowing. Marcus realized what he was seeing, or rather what he wasn't seeing. The space where Elena had been laboring was empty except for shadows and concrete dust. "What woman?" the older cop asked. Marcus turned, his heart lurching. Elena was gone. Not hidden, not collapsed behind some piece of machinery, simply absent, as if she'd never been there at all. Only a small puddle of water marked where she'd been kneeling, dark against the stained concrete. "She was right there," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "Pregnant, in a white dress. She's the one who—" He stopped, realizing how insane it would sound. "She's the one who led me to evidence of murders committed 15 years ago. She's the one who's been dead since before I was even born." Tommy's laughter was bitter and knowing. "Told you nobody would believe it." More officers flooded in, securing the scene with efficient professionalism. Someone called for the EMTs, and within moments the garage that had been Marcus's prison was transformed into a crime scene buzzing with activity. Portable lights banished the shadows that had hidden so many secrets. Detective Sarah Chen arrived 20 minutes later, her badge identifying her as Kern County Sheriff's Department. She was compact and sharp-eyed, the kind of cop who'd seen enough to know that truth usually lived in the details everyone else overlooked. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, accepting the photographs Marcus offered with evidence gloves. "These are quite something. Where exactly did you find them?" Marcus pointed to the metal box, now tagged and photographed by the crime scene team, hidden in the wall. "There's more inside, documents, what looks like financial records." Chen studied the photos with professional detachment, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes when she reached the one showing Tommy standing over Agent Wilson's body. Mr. Valdez, you're under arrest for the murders of Diego Rodriguez and federal agent Sarah Wilson. You have the right to remain silent. As Chen read Tommy his rights, Marcus found himself scanning the garage for any sign of Elena. The puddle of water was still there, though the crime scene photographer had marked it with a numbered placard. Physical evidence of something that shouldn't be possible. "Detective," Marcus said when Chen finished with Tommy, "there was a woman here, pregnant in labor. She disappeared when your officers arrived." Chen's expression didn't change, but she made a note. "Can you describe her?" "Mid-20s, Hispanic, about 8 months pregnant. She said her name was Elena." Marcus hesitated. "She said the Hell Riders had kidnapped her." "The Hell Riders have been disbanded for over a decade," Chen said carefully. "Most of the original members are dead or in federal prison." "I know. That's what made it so strange." Chen studied his face for a long moment. "Mr. Rodriguez, you've been through a significant trauma tonight. Sometimes the mind processes stress in unusual ways. We'll check for any reports of missing pregnant women, but for now, let's focus on what we can verify." Marcus nodded, understanding the subtext. "Stick to the facts that make sense. Don't mention ghosts or impossible women who knew things they couldn't know. Don't talk about the way Elena's touch felt like ice and fire at the same time, or how she'd vanished like smoke when the lights arrived." But as the crime scene team worked around him, Marcus found evidence of Elena's presence that the rational world couldn't explain away. Footprints in the dust, too small to be his or Tommy's. A few long, dark hairs caught on a piece of rusted metal, and in the corner where she'd knelt during labor, someone had scratched words into the concrete with what looked like a fingernail. "Tell Maria the truth." The words were old, the concrete scarred and weathered around them, as if they'd been there for years. But Marcus was certain they hadn't been visible before. His phone buzzed with a text from Maria, called in sick to work. "Something feels wrong. Are you okay?" Marcus stared at the message. Sent 20 minutes ago, exactly when the police had arrived. Maria's instincts had always been uncanny, but this felt like more than intuition, as if Elena's influence extended beyond the garage, reaching across the miles to touch the woman who'd become his anchor in the normal world. Detective Chen approached with a clipboard. "We'll need a full statement, but the preliminary evidence supports your account. Mr. Valdez is being transported to county lockup. You're free to go." Marcus looked around the garage one more time. Soon, it would be empty again, holding only silence and shadows and the ghosts of things that could never be fully explained. But the truth was finally free. The ordeal begins. Marcus walked out of the garage into the pre-dawn darkness, but freedom felt nothing like he'd imagined. The desert air should have been a relief after hours of stale concrete and motor oil, but each breath carried the weight of everything that remained unresolved. Tommy was in custody, the evidence secured, but Elena's disappearance left a void that made his chest tight with unfinished business. Detective Chen's business card was warm in his pocket, along with instructions to report to the station later for a complete statement. But as he climbed into his truck and started the engine, Marcus knew his real ordeal was just beginning. The garage had been a prison of circumstance. This was something far more terrifying. This was choice. His phone showed 37 missed calls from Maria. The drive back to Fresno stretched before him like a gauntlet. 3 hours to figure out how to explain the unexplainable to the woman who'd built her life around the belief that Marcus Rodriguez was exactly who he claimed to be. A reformed man. Someone whose past was troubled but contained, whose demons were manageable and whose future was clean. Not someone who'd spent 15 years running from a murder scene. Not someone whose brother had died because Marcus had been too weak to save him. The highway was empty except for long-haul truckers and shift workers heading home from late jobs. Marcus found himself driving exactly the speed limit, hands at 10 and 2, as if perfect compliance with traffic laws could somehow balance the cosmic scales. The radio offered nothing but static between stations, leaving him alone with thoughts that circled like vultures. Tell Maria the truth. Elena's message scratched into concrete haunted him. How did you tell someone you loved that your entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies? That the gentle, patient man who rubbed her feet after 12-hour nursing shifts and remembered to buy flowers for no reason had once watched his own brother bleed out on a garage floor? His phone rang. Maria's ringtone, a snippet of Etta James that she'd chosen because she said it reminded her of how he looked at her. Marcus stared at the screen until it went to voicemail, then listened to her voice crackle through the truck's old speakers. "Marcus, baby, I don't know what's happening, but something's wrong. I can feel it in my bones. I know you're probably just dealing with those assholes from the crew, but call me back, please. I love you." The desperation in her voice was a knife twist. Maria's intuition had always been supernatural in its accuracy. She'd called in sick from the ER because something felt wrong, at the exact moment police were arriving at the garage, as if Elena's presence had rippled out across the desert, touching everyone connected to this web of secrets. Marcus pulled over at a truck stop in Buttonwillow, needing time to think before he faced her. The parking lot was an island of harsh fluorescent light in an ocean of agricultural darkness. Inside, a few travelers nursed coffee and stared at their phones while a radio played country music that sounded like heartbreak set to melody. He bought coffee he didn't want and sat in a booth that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. The truth was a living thing now, clawing at his chest, demanding release. For 15 years, he'd convinced himself that silence was protection. For Maria, for himself, for everyone who'd built lives around the illusion of his redemption. But Elena had shown him the cost of buried secrets. Diego's murder had festered in that garage like an infected wound, drawing in everyone it touched. Tommy's obsession, Agent Wilson's death, even the crew's cruel prank. All of it connected by threads of unresolved violence. The coffee was bitter, but Marcus drank it anyway, using the burn to focus his thoughts. He could still run. Take the truck west instead of north. Disappear into Los Angeles or San Francisco or any of a dozen places where Marcus Rodriguez could become someone else entirely. It would destroy Maria, but she was young enough to heal, strong enough to build a new life. Or he could drive home and face the hardest conversation of his life. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed and aged beyond the single night he'd spent in hell. But underneath the exhaustion, something else was emerging, something he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. The person Diego had believed he could become. Marcus finished his coffee and walked back to the truck. The engine turned over on the first try, a small grace in a night full of impossible choices. He pulled back onto Highway 99 and pointed the truck north, toward Fresno, toward Maria, toward whatever came next. Behind him, the lights of the truck stop faded into darkness, but ahead, the sky was beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. The ordeal of the garage was over. The ordeal of living with truth was just beginning. The dark moment. The ordeal of living with truth lasted exactly 43 miles. Marcus was still 20 minutes outside Fresno when the red and blue lights erupted in his rearview mirror. The California Highway Patrol cruiser had materialized from nowhere, closing fast with its siren cutting through the dawn quiet like a scream. His first instinct was confusion. He'd been driving like a saint, 10 under the limit, every signal precise. Then he saw the second car, and the third. They boxed him in with military efficiency, forcing him onto the shoulder as the sun painted the San Joaquin Valley in shades of gold and amber. Marcus killed the engine and raised his hands, muscle memory from a youth spent being pulled over taking control. But these weren't routine traffic stops. These were federal agents, their black SUVs gleaming like beetles in the morning light. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh approached his window with a badge and a smile that promised nothing good. "Mr. Rodriguez, please step out of the vehicle." "I already talked to the local police," Marcus said, but he was already complying, hands visible, movements slow and deliberate. "Detective Chen has my statement." "This isn't about your statement." Walsh's partner moved to flank him, a mountain of a man whose jacket bulged with concealed weapons. "This is about the federal agent whose murder you helped cover up for 15 years. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus felt the careful structure of his new life, the one he'd been driving home to preserve, crumble like a house of cards in an earthquake. "I didn't cover up anything. I found Tommy's photographs and turned them over to..." After 15 years of silence, Walsh's voice was conversational, almost friendly. 15 years of knowing that a federal agent died in that garage while you walked away. I didn't know Agent Wilson was federal. I didn't know she was even there that night. But you knew Diego Rodriguez was murdered, your own brother, and you ran instead of reporting it. The truth of it was inescapable. Marcus had built his entire adult life on the foundation of that single moment of cowardice, the instant he'd chosen survival over justice, self-preservation over doing what was right. He could rationalize it, explain the circumstances, detail Tommy's threats and the impossibility of his situation. But at its core, Walsh was right. He'd known his brother was dead, and he'd said nothing. "Hands behind your back," the partner said, producing handcuffs that caught the sunrise like promises of steel. "Marcus Rodriguez, you're under arrest for accessory after the fact in the murder of federal agent Sarah Wilson and obstruction of justice in a federal investigation." The cuffs clicked shut with a sound like closing doors. Marcus watched his truck being searched by agents in latex gloves, his life dismantled piece by piece on the roadside. They found nothing incriminating, there was nothing to find, but that wasn't the point. The point was the message being sent, the demonstration of power, the systematic destruction of hope. "My girlfriend," Marcus said as Walsh guided him toward one of the SUVs. "She doesn't know about any of this. Can I call her?" Walsh's laugh was genuinely amused. "Mr. Rodriguez, I think you'll find that Ms. Maria Santos knows quite a bit more than you think." The words were a punch to the gut. What's that supposed to mean? Maria Santos, registered nurse, employed at Fresno General Hospital. Also, Maria Santos, sister of Elena Santos, who disappeared 15 years ago while investigating the Hell Riders for a story she was writing for the Fresno Bee. Walsh opened the SUV door with theatrical courtesy. Small world, isn't it? The revelation hit Marcus like a physical force, stealing his breath and buckling his knees. Elena Santos. Elena, the pregnant woman who'd saved him, who'd led him to the truth, who'd known impossible things about his past. Elena, who'd vanished like smoke when the police arrived. Elena, who'd been dead for 15 years. And Maria, sweet, intuitive Maria who'd called in sick because something felt wrong, was her sister. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. But even as he said it, he was remembering details that suddenly made terrible sense. The way Maria sometimes stared into the distance as if listening to voices only she could hear. Her uncanny intuition, her ability to know when he was troubled, even when he tried to hide it. The fact that she'd found him, of all the men in Fresno, and built a life with someone whose past should have sent any rational woman running. "Sit down, Mr. Rodriguez." Walsh's voice had lost its false friendliness, becoming businesslike and cold. "You have a lot of questions to answer." As the SUV pulled away from his abandoned truck, Marcus watched his future disappear in the side mirror. Maria would be waiting at their apartment, probably making breakfast and worrying about his empty side of the bed. By evening, she'd be watching his arrest on the news, learning that the man she loved was connected to her sister's death in ways that defied understanding. The dark moment had arrived. Everything he'd fought to build, everything he'd hoped to become, was gone. And the sun kept rising, indifferent to the wreckage below. The revelation. The federal holding cell in downtown Fresno was a concrete box painted institutional beige, designed to strip away dignity along with freedom. Marcus sat on the narrow bench, still processing the earthquake that had shattered his understanding of reality. Elena Santos, dead for 15 years. Maria's sister, the woman who'd saved him in that garage, wasn't just a ghost. She was Maria's ghost. Every conversation with Maria played through his mind like a film reel, details reshaping themselves into a pattern he'd been too blind to see. The way she'd approached him at that coffee shop 2 years ago, not with the casual interest of a stranger, but with the focused intensity of someone who'd been searching. Her questions about his past, always gentle but persistent, as if she already knew the answers and was testing his honesty. "You seem like someone who's been through something terrible," she'd said on their third date, her dark eyes holding depths he'd mistaken for empathy rather than recognition. "We've all got damage," he'd replied, deflecting as always. "Some damage is different. Some of it echoes across generations, touching people who weren't even there when it happened." He'd thought she was talking about her work at the hospital, the trauma she witnessed daily, but she'd been talking about Elena, about the sister who died investigating a story that led straight to Marcus Rodriguez. The cell door opened with a metallic shriek. Special Agent Walsh entered carrying a manila folder thick enough to represent a life's worth of sins. She took the only chair, leaving Marcus the bench, a power dynamic that felt rehearsed. "Maria Santos has been cooperative," Walsh said, opening the folder to reveal surveillance photographs. Marcus in various locations around Fresno, the auto shop, the grocery store, their apartment building. Months of surveillance, maybe years. "She's been monitoring you since you moved to the city." Marcus's throat felt lined with sandpaper. "Monitoring me for what?" "Information about her sister's disappearance." Walsh pulled out a photograph that made Marcus's blood freeze. Elena Santos, alive and vibrant, standing outside the offices of the Fresno Bee. The family resemblance to Maria was undeniable. The same dark eyes, the same determined chin. But Elena looked younger, more innocent, untouched by the tragedy that would claim her. Elena was investigating the Hell Riders' connection to a human trafficking ring. She'd gotten close to something big when she disappeared. Human trafficking? The words felt foreign in Marcus's mouth. Pregnant women, specifically. The Hell Riders were kidnapping undocumented immigrants, holding them until they gave birth, then selling the babies to couples willing to pay premium prices for off-the-books adoptions. Walsh's voice was clinical, but Marcus caught the tremor of suppressed rage. Elena Santos had identified several victims. She was preparing to publish when she vanished. The garage, the tunnels. Elena's pregnancy in the vision. It hadn't been mystical revelation but memory, the echo of her final story playing out in the place where she'd died pursuing truth. "Tommy killed her," Marcus said, the certainty settling in his bones like ice. Tommy Valdez pulled the trigger. Yes, but he was following orders from someone higher up the chain. Someone who knew Elena was getting close and wanted her silenced permanently. Walsh leaned forward, her intensity filling the small space. "Your brother Diego was Elena's source inside the Hell Riders. He was feeding her information about the trafficking operation." The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Diego hadn't just been a member of the Hell Riders, he'd been an informant, risking everything to expose their crimes. The brother Marcus had written off as a lost cause, had been trying to save innocent lives. "The night you found Diego dying," Walsh continued, "he'd just delivered the final piece of evidence Elena needed. Names, locations, financial records. But Tommy discovered the betrayal. Elena was already at the garage waiting for the handoff when Tommy arrived with backup." Marcus closed his eyes, but the vision was inescapable now. Elena, 8 months pregnant and terrified, trapped in the garage while Diego bled out trying to protect the story that would expose the trafficking ring. Two people who'd chosen courage over safety, dying in the dark while Marcus ran. "Maria knew," he whispered. Maria suspected. "Elena had been investigating you along with the Hell Riders, not as a perpetrator, but as someone who might have information about the club's operations. When Elena disappeared, Maria inherited her sister's obsession. She spent 15 years looking for answers." The folder contained more photographs. Maria at Elena's grave. Maria interviewing former Hell Riders members. Maria in deep conversation with Detective Chen, who apparently hadn't been as surprised by Marcus's story as she'd pretended. "She found you, Marcus, not the other way around. Everything about your relationship, the coffee shop meeting, the natural compatibility, the way she seemed to understand your past without judgment, it was all deliberate." Marcus felt something fundamental break inside his chest. The one pure thing in his life, the love that had redeemed him and given him hope for the future, was built on the same foundation of lies and manipulation that had defined everything else. Maria hadn't fallen in love with Marcus Rodriguez, the reformed mechanic. She'd cultivated Marcus Rodriguez, the witness, mining him for information about her sister's death. But even as the betrayal carved hollow spaces in his heart, Another realization was forming. Elena's appearance in the garage hadn't been random supernatural intervention. It had been Maria's love, somehow reaching across the impossible distance between the living and the dead, guiding him toward the truth Elena had died trying to expose. The dead didn't rest when justice remained undone, and neither did the living who loved them. Marcus stared at the folder in Agent Walsh's hands, seeing his entire life reorganized into a pattern he'd never recognized. The photographs, the surveillance reports, the careful documentation of Maria's 15-year quest for answers. It was overwhelming and devastating and somehow, unexpectedly, liberating. "I want to see her," he said quietly. Walsh raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Santos? That's not how this works, Mr. Rodriguez. You're under federal arrest for—" "I know what I'm under arrest for." Marcus stood, pacing the small cell like a caged animal. "But Maria spent 15 years looking for the truth about Elena. I spent 15 years running from it. Maybe it's time we stopped working against each other." The agent consulted her watch, then the folder, clearly weighing options Marcus couldn't see. "You understand that anything you discuss with Ms. Santos can be used as evidence? There's no spousal privilege here. You're not married." "I understand." The words came easier than he'd expected. After a lifetime of hiding, the prospect of complete honesty felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a cave. "But I think Maria deserves to hear the truth from me, not from federal prosecutors." Walsh gathered her materials and stood. 20 minutes. Supervised conversation. "And, Mr. Rodriguez, this doesn't change your legal situation. You're still facing serious federal charges." But Marcus was already somewhere else, preparing himself for the hardest conversation of his life. They brought Maria to a conference room that smelled of stale coffee and broken dreams. When she walked through the door, Marcus saw Elena's ghost in her face, the same determined jaw, the same dark eyes that missed nothing. But where Elena had radiated desperate urgency in the garage, Maria carried a different weight, the patient sorrow of someone who'd spent half her life grieving. She sat across the metal table like they were strangers, which Marcus realized they probably always had been. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Known what? That you were in the garage the night Elena died?" Maria's voice was steady, professional. "I've suspected for 2 years. But I only confirmed it when the police called this morning about Tommy's photographs. Not about the garage, about who I was before we met." Maria's composure cracked slightly. "I knew Marcus Rodriguez had been a hell rider. I knew he'd left the gang suddenly around the time Elena disappeared. I knew he'd built a new life in Fresno under his real name instead of running somewhere else, which suggested either incredible stupidity or crushing guilt. Which did you think it was?" "Both." She leaned forward, and Marcus saw years of careful planning in her expression. "I thought you were a coward who'd watched my sister die and said nothing. I wanted to get close enough to prove it. And then I fell in love with you." The admission came out like a confession, raw and reluctant, which was the last thing I expected. "You weren't what I thought you'd be, Marcus. You were gentle and patient and completely destroyed by whatever you'd been through. I started wondering if maybe you weren't the villain in Elena's story." Marcus reached across the table, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I was never the villain, but I wasn't the hero either. I was just a scared kid who made the worst possible choice at the worst possible moment. Tell me what really happened." So he did. Everything this time. Diego's secret work with Elena, the trafficking ring, the night in the garage when 2 people had died for trying to do the right thing. Marcus held nothing back, not his cowardice, not his 15 years of silence, not the supernatural encounter with Elena's spirit that had finally forced him to face the truth. When he finished, Maria was crying. Not the dramatic sobs of television grief, but the quiet tears of someone finally receiving answers to questions that had haunted her entire adult life. "She was trying to save those women," Maria whispered. "The pregnant women they were trafficking. That's why she was there that night." "Yes. And your sister saved me too, Maria. Twice. Once in that garage when she led me to the evidence, and once when she brought you into my life." Maria looked up sharply. Don't you dare try to make this romantic, Marcus. I manipulated you. I built our entire relationship on a lie. So did I. But maybe that's not all it was. Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling something new taking shape between them. Not the love they'd built on deception, but something harder and more honest. We both spent 15 years looking for Elena's truth. Maybe we can find it together. Agent Walsh cleared her throat from the corner. Time's up. But as the guards moved to escort Marcus back to his cell, he felt something he hadn't experienced since that night in the garage: hope. Not for freedom. He understood that his legal troubles were just beginning, but hope that maybe, finally, Elena Santos would get the justice she died pursuing, and maybe the living could find peace alongside the dead. The guards led Marcus back to his cell, but the concrete walls could no longer contain the momentum building inside him. Hope was dangerous in a place like this. It made men careless, desperate, willing to trade everything for one more chance at redemption. But Marcus had already lost everything that mattered: his freedom, his carefully constructed new life, even the love he'd thought was real. All that remained was the choice between finishing what Elena had started or letting her story die with him in federal prison. He lay on the narrow cot, staring at fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects, and made his decision. The next morning brought a different agent, younger, hungrier, with the kind of ambition that fed on high-profile cases. Agent Torres introduced himself with a smile that never reached his eyes and a folder thick enough to bury a man. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'll be direct. The evidence against you is substantial. Accessory after the fact to federal murder, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal evidence of human trafficking. You're looking at 25 years minimum." Marcus sat up straighter. "What do you want?" "Your cooperation. Full disclosure about the Hell Riders' organizational structure, their remaining associates, any ongoing criminal enterprises you might know about." Torres opened his folder to reveal surveillance photos of men Marcus barely recognized, Hell Riders who'd aged 15 years since he'd last seen them. "Help us finish dismantling the network, and we can discuss reduced charges. I've been out of that world for 15 years. I don't know anything about current operations. But you know about historical ones. The trafficking ring Elena Santos died investigating. It wasn't the Hell Riders' only business. There were drug networks, arms dealing, money laundering operations. Help us map those connections, and maybe we can find a path forward that doesn't end with you dying in federal prison." Marcus studied the photographs, seeing ghosts of his former life staring back at him. These men had aged hard, their faces marked by violence and paranoia. Some he'd genuinely cared about once. Others had threatened to kill him for walking away. All of them had chosen to stay in a world that devoured everything decent in a person. "There's something else you should know," Torres continued. "Tommy Valdez was released from state prison 6 months ago. Parole for good behavior." The blood in Marcus's veins turned to ice water. "Where is he now?" "That's the interesting part. He's been asking questions about Elena Santos, visiting her old colleagues at the Fresno Bee, talking to former Hell Riders members about the night she died. It seems Mr. Valdez is concerned that certain secrets might surface after all these years." Marcus thought of Maria, alone in their apartment, probably fielding calls from reporters and trying to process the revelation that her boyfriend was connected to her sister's murder. If Tommy was out and looking for loose ends to tie up, you need to protect Maria. Miss Santos is safe, but her safety might depend on your cooperation. Torres closed the folder with deliberate precision. "Help us build cases against the remaining network members, and we'll make sure she stays that way." It wasn't really a choice. Marcus had spent 15 years running from the Hell Riders, and now they were coming for the only person left in the world who mattered to him. The woman whose sister had died trying to expose their crimes. The woman who'd spent half her life seeking justice for Elena's murder. "I'll need immunity for Maria. Complete immunity. Whatever she did while investigating Elena's disappearance, whatever laws she broke getting close to me, none of it touches her." Torres smiled, and this time it looked genuine. "That can be arranged, and I want regular updates on her security situation. If Tommy or anyone else even looks at her wrong, our deal is off." "Understood." Do we have an agreement, Mr. Rodriguez? Marcus thought about Elena in that garage, 8 months pregnant and terrified, dying because she'd chosen courage over safety. He thought about Diego, bleeding out while trying to protect the evidence that would expose the trafficking ring. He thought about Maria, spending 15 years searching for answers to questions that had shaped her entire adult life. The road back led through the truth, no matter how much it cost. Yeah, Marcus said, feeling the weight of 15 years lifting from his shoulders. We have a deal. Outside the small window, storm clouds were gathering over Fresno, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. But for the first time since that Halloween night in 2019, Marcus Rodriguez wasn't afraid of what was coming. He'd committed to finishing what Elena started, accepting whatever consequences followed. The final confrontation was approaching, and this time he wouldn't run. Agent Torres wasted no time putting their agreement into motion. Within hours, Marcus found himself in a secure federal facility outside Fresno, surrounded by whiteboards covered in photographs, timelines, and connecting lines that mapped 15 years of Hell Riders' criminal activity. The room smelled of coffee and determination, filled with agents who'd been building cases against the motorcycle club for longer than Marcus cared to think about. "We start with what you know," Torres said, placing a digital recorder on the metal table between them. "Every detail, no matter how insignificant it seems." The trafficking operation Elena Santos died investigating was just one branch of a much larger tree. Marcus stared at the photographs covering the walls, some familiar faces, others strangers who'd apparently joined the Hell Riders after his departure. In the center of it all was a recent surveillance photo of Tommy Valdez, his face harder and more dangerous than the young man who'd pulled the trigger in that garage 15 years ago. Tommy wasn't running the trafficking ring, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the memories clawing at his throat. He was muscle, following orders. The real architect was someone called El Jefe, the boss. None of us knew his real name. He operated through intermediaries, kept himself insulated from direct contact with the club. Agent Martinez, a woman with Elena's same determined eyes, leaned forward. "What can you tell us about these intermediaries?" There was a lawyer in Bakersfield, Sarah Chen, no relation to the detective. She handled the legal paperwork for the fake adoption agencies they used as fronts, and a doctor named Ramirez who operated out of a clinic near the border. He handled the medical side, making sure the babies were healthy for delivery to buyers. Torres was taking notes furiously. "Are these people still active?" "I don't know. But Diego kept records, names, dates, financial transactions. He was building a case for Elena, documenting everything." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering his brother's desperate whispers in that blood-soaked garage. He hid the evidence somewhere safe. Said Elena was the only one who knew where. The room went quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the scratch of pens on paper. Marcus could feel the weight of every agent's attention, the sense that he'd just provided the key to unlocking a case that had frustrated federal investigators for over a decade. "Elena never told her sister about any hiding place," Martinez said. "We've been through all her personal effects, her apartment, her office at the newspaper. Nothing. Then maybe she hid it somewhere only she and Diego knew about." Marcus stood, pacing the small space as fragments of memory coalesced into understanding. The tunnels under the garage, they were more extensive than I realized when Elena led me through them. She knew that place intimately, like she'd been there multiple times. Torres was already reaching for his phone. "We need to get a forensics team back to that garage. Full excavation of the tunnel system." But Marcus was remembering something else, a detail that had seemed insignificant at the time. Elena wasn't just leading me to freedom that night. She was trying to show me something specific. There was a moment when she stopped, turned toward one of the tunnel walls like she was looking at something I couldn't see. The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. Elena's spirit hadn't just been guiding Marcus to safety. She'd been trying to lead him to the evidence that would expose the Hell Riders' crimes, evidence that might still be hidden in those tunnels, waiting for someone who knew how to look. "There's something else," Marcus said, the words coming faster as pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Tommy's not just trying to silence potential witnesses, he's looking for Diego's evidence. That's why he's been contacting Elena's colleagues, former Hellriders members. He knows there's documentation out there that could destroy what's left of the organization. Martinez looked up from her notes, which means he's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Or they eliminate threats. Marcus thought of Maria, alone and vulnerable while federal agents played their careful games. How well protected is she really? Well enough, Torres said, but his tone suggested complications. Miss Santos is resistant to protective custody. She insists on maintaining her normal routine, going to work at the hospital. She says hiding from Tommy would mean letting him win. It sounded exactly like something Maria would say, and exactly like something that would get her killed. Marcus could see Elena's determination in her sister's stubbornness, the same courage that had led one Santos woman into a deadly garage and might lead another toward the same fate. I need to be part of this, Marcus said. Not just giving statements from a safe room. If you're going back to that garage, if you're trying to draw Tommy out, I need to be there. Torres shook his head. Absolutely not. You're a federal witness now, not an operative. I'm the only one who's been in those tunnels with Elena. I'm the only one who might be able to find what she was trying to show me. Marcus met every agent's eyes in turn, seeing the calculation behind their professional facades. And I'm the bait Tommy wants most. Use that. Outside the secure facility's windows, storm clouds were building towards something that looked like Judgment Day. Marcus could feel the weight of 15 years of running finally settling on his shoulders, transforming into something harder and more purposeful. The final test was beginning, and this time he wouldn't fail Elena's faith in him. The storm broke just as the convoy reached the abandoned garage, rain hammering the desert like bullets against bone. Marcus sat in the back of an armored federal vehicle, wearing a wire and a Kevlar vest that felt inadequate against the weight of 15 years' worth of accumulated fear. Through the reinforced windows, he could see the Hellriders' garage squatting in the darkness like a cancer on the landscape, its broken windows glowing with the infrared heat signatures of the tactical team already in position. Remember, your job is to draw him out and get him talking, Agent Torres said through the earpiece. We need a confession on record. Don't try to be a hero. But heroism was exactly what Elena had died for, and what Diego had bled out trying to achieve. Marcus checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. on a night that felt like Halloween all over again, when the barriers between the living and the dead grew thin enough for justice to slip through. The garage door had been left partially open, just as they'd planned. Marcus walked toward it alone, his footsteps echoing off wet concrete, feeling like a man approaching his own execution. The familiar smell hit him immediately, motor oil, rust, and something darker that 15 years couldn't wash away. Hello, Tank? Tommy Valdez stepped out of the shadows near the spot where Diego had died. He looked older, harder, his face scarred by prison fights and whatever demons had been eating at him since that night. In his hand was a chrome .45, the same gun Marcus remembered from their Hellrider days. Tommy. Marcus kept his voice level, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Figured you'd show up eventually. You always were smart. Too smart for your own good. Tommy moved closer, the gun steady in his grip. 15 years, Marcus. 15 years I've been wondering when you'd finally grow some balls and come back to finish this. I'm here now. Yeah, you are, with half the FBI watching from the shadows. Tommy's laugh was bitter, empty. You think I'm stupid? Think I don't know this is a setup? Marcus felt sweat mixing with rainwater on his forehead. If Tommy knew about the surveillance, the entire operation was compromised. Then why did you come? Because some conversations can't wait anymore. Because that sister of Elena's has been asking too many questions, and because I'm tired of looking over my shoulder for ghosts. The mention of Maria sent ice through Marcus's veins. If you've touched her, relax. She's safe, for now. Tommy gestured with the gun toward the deeper shadows of the garage. But that depends on how this conversation goes. See, I've got a problem, Tank. There's evidence out there somewhere. Evidence that could put me away forever. Evidence your brother hid before I put 2 bullets in his chest. I don't know where it is. But you've been back here. Been in those tunnels with Elena's ghost or whatever supernatural bullshit you've convinced yourself happened. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. I know because I've got cameras set up down there now. Motion sensors. And 3 weeks ago, something that looked exactly like a pregnant woman walked through those tunnels and stood in front of a wall for 20 minutes before disappearing. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Elena was still here, still trying to lead someone to the evidence, still fighting for justice even in death. Where's the wall, Marcus? Where did she stop? Before Marcus could answer, a new voice cut through the darkness. She stopped where our baby is buried. Both men turned toward the sound, and Marcus's world tilted sideways. Standing in the tunnel entrance was Elena Santos, 8 months pregnant, her face pale but her eyes blazing with 15 years of accumulated fury. Not a spirit this time, not a guilt-induced hallucination, but flesh and blood and impossible truth. Elena? Marcus breathed. Hello, Marcus. Hello, Tommy. Her voice was steady, calm, deadly. I think it's time we finished our conversation. Tommy raised the gun, his hand shaking for the first time since Marcus had known him. You're dead. I watched you die. I watched Marcus carry your body out of those tunnels. You watched Marcus carry out a woman who'd been dead for hours, a trafficking victim whose body Diego and I found in the tunnels. Elena stepped closer, fearless. I've been hiding for 15 years, waiting for the right moment to surface, waiting until I could expose everything without getting killed for it. Marcus felt his legs give out, dropping him to his knees on the concrete. 15 years of guilt, of conversations with a dead woman, of believing he'd failed to save her, and Elena Santos had been alive the entire time. The evidence is behind that wall, Tommy. Diego's complete records of the trafficking operation. Names, dates, financial records, everything. Elena's smile was sharp as broken glass. And now you're going to help us dig it up. The final confrontation had begun, but nothing was as Marcus had expected. The dead weren't dead, the guilty weren't who he'd thought, and justice wore a face he'd been mourning for 15 years. The silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Tommy's gun wavered between Elena and Marcus, confusion warring with desperation across his scarred features. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear Agent Torres barking orders to the surveillance team. But the words felt distant, unreal. 15 years, Tommy whispered, his voice cracking. 15 goddamn years I've been carrying the weight of killing a pregnant woman. I needed you to believe I was dead, Elena said, moving closer with the fearlessness of someone who'd already survived the worst imaginable. It was the only way to stay alive long enough to gather real evidence. The only way to protect my family. Marcus struggled to his feet, his mind reeling. Maria, she's been searching for you all this time. She's been living with the grief I caused, I know. For the first time, Elena's composure cracked slightly. Do you think that was easy? Watching my sister destroy herself, looking for answers while I hid in witness protection, building a case that would actually stick? Witness protection? Tommy's laugh was hollow. The feds have known you were alive this whole time? Not the feds. Private protection. There are people who make it their business to help women disappear when the system fails them. Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly. People who understand that sometimes death is the only way to find justice for the living. Marcus watched Tommy's finger tighten on the trigger, and something crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. Elena had engineered all of this. The Halloween night encounter, the conversations in the garage, even his capture by the FBI. She'd been guiding him toward this moment for 15 years. The baby, Marcus said suddenly. That night in the tunnels, you weren't 8 months pregnant. You couldn't have been. Elena's smile was sad, knowing, no, I was 2 months pregnant. But by the time I emerged from hiding, I'd lost the baby. Stress, trauma, fear, it doesn't matter why. What mattered was that Tommy believed he'd killed a woman carrying his brother's child. My brother's, Tommy's face went white. Diego was the father? Diego was trying to help me escape. We fell in love during those weeks of planning. And when I lost the baby, Elena's voice hardened again. I made sure his evidence would survive even if we didn't. Through his earpiece, Marcus heard Torres counting down. The federal team was moving into position, but something told him this confrontation wouldn't wait for official intervention. Tommy was cornering like a wounded animal, and cornered animals were most dangerous when they had nothing left to lose. I can make this easy for you, Tommy, Elena continued. Help us retrieve Diego's evidence. Testify against the people who are still running trafficking operations. The FBI will protect you. Protect me? Tommy's laugh was bitter. You want me to be a snitch, rat out people who trusted me. People who used you, Marcus interjected, finding his voice. People who let you carry the guilt for crimes they orchestrated. When did you become expendable to them, Tommy? When did they stop protecting you? He watched recognition flicker across Tommy's face. In prison, cut off from the Hell Riders protection network, Tommy would have realized exactly how dispensable foot soldiers were to the organization's leadership. The people giving orders never paid the real price. It doesn't matter now, Tommy said, but his gun hand was shaking harder. Too much blood. Too many bodies. Your brother's body, Elena said quietly. You killed the only person who ever really cared about you. That was the breaking point. Tommy spun toward Elena, the gun rising, and Marcus moved without thinking. 15 years of guilt and failed courage condensed into a single moment of clarity. He threw himself between Elena and the gun, just as Tommy pulled the trigger. The bullet hit him high in the chest, spinning him sideways into the concrete. Through the roaring in his ears, he heard Elena screaming, heard federal agents shouting commands, heard Tommy's gun clatter to the floor. But what struck him most was the absence of pain, just a spreading numbness and the strange sensation of weight lifting from his shoulders. Elena knelt beside him, pressing her hands against the wound, and Marcus could see tears streaming down her face. You stupid, brave man. Why did you— Because I failed you once, Marcus whispered, tasting copper. Because someone had to choose differently this time. Around them, the garage filled with federal agents, paramedics, the controlled chaos of justice finally arriving. Tommy sat slumped against a wall, hands zip-tied behind his back, staring at the spreading pool of blood with something like horror. As consciousness faded, Marcus felt Elena's hand in his, warm and alive and real. The sacrifice was made, the price paid in full. Whatever came next, at least the truth would survive. The antiseptic smell of the hospital was a jarring contrast to the motor oil and blood that had defined Marcus's nightmares for 15 years. He surfaced from unconsciousness slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a dark lake, awareness returning in fragments. The steady beep of monitors, soft voices in the hallway, the weight of bandages across his chest where Tommy's bullet had carved its path just inches from his heart. You're awake. Marcus turned his head, wincing at the sharp pull in his shoulder, to find Elena Santos sitting beside his hospital bed. She looked exhausted, her dark hair pulled back messily, but alive in a way that still felt impossible after 15 years of believing otherwise. How long? His voice came out as a croak. 3 days. The doctors weren't sure you'd make it through the first night. Elena's hand found his, her grip warm and steady. The bullet missed your heart by less than an inch, but it nicked your lung and shattered part of your collarbone. Marcus tried to process the magnitude of what had happened in that garage. Tommy? In federal custody. Agent Torres says he's been talking non-stop since they arrested him. Names, locations, financial records. Apparently, 15 years of guilt is a powerful motivator for confession. Elena's expression darkened slightly. They found Diego's evidence exactly where I told them it would be, hidden in a waterproof case behind loose bricks in the tunnel wall. Your brother documented everything, Marcus. Every transaction, every victim, every person involved in the trafficking operation. The weight of vindication settled over Marcus like a heavy blanket. Diego hadn't just been muscle for the Hell Riders. He'd been building a case that would finally bring justice for Elena and countless other victims. The people behind it all? 3 federal prosecutors are working around the clock to build cases. The lawyer, Sarah Chen, was arrested yesterday at her office. Dr. Ramirez tried to flee to Mexico, but they caught him at the border. Elena's smile held no warmth. The man they called El Jefe turned out to be a city councilman in Bakersfield who'd been using his political connections to facilitate adoptions and cover up investigations. He's looking at life without parole. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling 15 years of tension finally beginning to drain from his body. And Maria? She's here. Has been since they brought you in. Elena's voice softened. She's angry with me, angrier than I've ever seen her. But she's also relieved. We have a lot of healing to do, a lot of years to make up for. As if summoned by their conversation, the hospital room door opened, and Maria Santos stepped inside. She looked older than Marcus remembered, her face etched with lines of grief and exhaustion, but her eyes held the same fierce determination that ran in the Santos family. "You're an idiot," she said to Marcus without preamble, "throwing yourself in front of a gun like some action movie hero." "Maria," Elena started. "And you." Maria turned to her sister, tears streaming down her cheeks. 15 years, Elena. 15 years I thought you were dead. Do you have any idea what that did to me? What it did to Mama before she died?" The sisters stared at each other across the hospital bed, and Marcus could feel the weight of accumulated grief and love and anger crackling between them like electricity. Then Maria broke, rushing to Elena's side and pulling her into a fierce embrace. "I know," Elena whispered into her sister's hair. "I know what it cost. But it was the only way to stay alive long enough to bring them all down. The only way to make sure no other families would be destroyed the way ours was." Marcus watched the reunion with a mixture of joy and sorrow, understanding that some wounds took more than justice to heal. He thought about the families of the other trafficking victims, the parents who would finally learn what had happened to their children, the survivors who might now find some measure of peace. Agent Torres appeared in the doorway, looking uncomfortable about interrupting the emotional scene. "Sorry to intrude, but we need to discuss next steps. The defense attorneys are already trying to discredit witness testimony, claiming coercion and prosecutorial misconduct." "They'll fail," Elena said, not releasing her hold on her sister. "Diego's evidence is ironclad, and now they have Tommy's confession to corroborate everything." Marcus struggled to sit up straighter, ignoring the spike of pain through his chest. "What happens to me?" "Witness protection if you want it," Torres replied. "New identity, new location, federal support until the trials are over. Or you can stay and testify openly, knowing there are still hell riders out there who might want revenge." Through the hospital window, Marcus could see the California desert stretching toward distant mountains, vast and clean under afternoon sunlight. For the first time in 15 years, the landscape didn't look like a place to run from, but a place where new beginnings might be possible. "I'm staying," he said. "Someone needs to speak for Diego. Someone needs to make sure his sacrifice meant something." Elena squeezed his hand, and Marcus felt the last of his ghosts finally settle into peace. The return. 2 months after the shooting, Marcus stood in the parking lot of Rodriguez and Sons Auto Repair, reading the freshly painted sign that bore his name for the first time in 15 years. The October afternoon was warm, desert winds carrying the scent of sage instead of motor oil and regret. His left arm still moved stiffly where Tommy's bullet had shattered bone, but his hands were steady as he unlocked the garage bay doors. "You sure about this?" Elena asked, stepping out of her Honda with careful movements. Her pregnancy had progressed smoothly despite the stress of testimony and trials, and she was due any day now. "Opening a business in the same town where half the Hell Riders used to live?" Marcus smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. The ones who aren't in federal prison moved on long ago. Besides, Bakersfield needs honest mechanics more than it needs my fear. The garage was small but clean, with new equipment purchased using the reward money from the trafficking case. Marcus had spent weeks scrubbing away any trace of the old Hell Riders shop, repainting walls and installing better lighting. This wasn't just a business. It was proof that spaces could be redeemed, that even the darkest places could serve something good. A familiar pickup truck pulled into the lot, and Marcus's heart jumped as his construction crew foreman, Pete, climbed out. Behind him came Danny and the other guys who'd locked Marcus in that cursed garage as a Halloween prank. The same men who'd inadvertently set in motion the chain of events that finally brought justice for Diego and Elena. "Tank," Pete said, approaching cautiously. "Heard you were opening up shop." The nickname no longer felt like a weight around Marcus's neck. These men had seen the news coverage, knew about his testimony against the trafficking ring, understood that their cruel joke had somehow led to the arrest of some of California's most dangerous criminals. "Pete." Marcus extended his hand, surprised when Pete took it without hesitation. "Guys, listen, we know things got complicated after that night," Danny said, shuffling his feet nervously. "We never meant for, we thought it was just a stupid prank." "It was a stupid prank," Marcus agreed. "But sometimes stupid pranks lead to necessary confrontations." Elena moved beside him, her presence a reminder of how drastically his world had changed. "Marcus has been telling me about your construction work. Are you hiring?" Pete's eyebrows rose. "You looking for work? Because honestly, after everything that came out at those trials, you are probably the most famous whistleblower in California right now." Marcus laughed, a sound that would have been impossible just months ago. "Not construction work, but if any of your crews need automotive repair, I'm hoping you'll consider giving me a chance." The conversation that followed was tentative but genuine. These men had worked alongside Marcus for years without knowing about his past, and the revelation of his Hellrider history had shocked them. But they'd also watched him testify against Tommy Valdez in the trafficking ring with a courage that earned their respect. As the crew left with promises to spread word about the new garage, Maria Santos arrived with grocery bags and a thermos of coffee. The relationship between the sisters was still fragile, still healing, but Maria had thrown herself into supporting Elena's final weeks of pregnancy with fierce determination. "Any word from Agent Torres?" Maria asked, settling into a folding chair they'd placed in the garage office. "Sentencing hearings start next week," Elena replied. "Sarah Chen took a plea deal, 25 years. Dr. Ramirez is facing life without parole, and they're confident the councilman will get the same." Marcus nodded, feeling the satisfaction of justice served without the bitter edge of revenge. "And Tommy?" 15 years, with possibility of parole in 10 if he continues cooperating with federal investigations. Elena's expression was thoughtful rather than angry. "It feels right. He was a tool, not the architect." The afternoon passed quickly as they organized the garage and talked about the future. Marcus had never imagined himself as a business owner, but the work felt meaningful in a way that construction never had. Every repair would be honest, every customer interaction a chance to prove that people could change. As evening approached, Elena suddenly gasped, her hand moving to her belly. "Marcus," she said, her voice tight with pain and anticipation. "I think it's time." The drive to the hospital was a blur of careful speed and nervous excitement. This baby, Diego's baby, conceived in love instead of violence, represented hope in a way that made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. Hours later, holding Elena's newborn son while she rested, Marcus understood that this was what redemption looked like. Not dramatic gestures or grand sacrifices, but the quiet courage to build something good from the wreckage of the past. Diego Santos Rodriguez entered the world at 3:47 a.m. on November 1st, All Saints' Day, carried by love and protected by truth. His father's evidence had freed countless victims, and his uncle's garage would serve honest work. Marcus looked through the hospital window at the California desert, no longer seeing a place of exile but a landscape of infinite possibility. He was home, the new beginning. 3 years later, Marcus stood in the doorway of Rodriguez and Sons Auto Repair, watching Diego toddle between the tool benches with the fearless determination of a child who'd never known anything but safety. The little boy's dark hair caught the morning sunlight streaming through the garage bay doors, and his laughter echoed off the walls where violence had once reigned. "Tio Tank," Diego squealed, holding up a plastic wrench Elena had bought him. "Fix car!" Marcus knelt down, his left shoulder still stiff on cold mornings, but strong enough for what mattered. "That's right, mijo. We fix things around here." The garage had exceeded every expectation. Word of Marcus's testimony had spread through Bakersfield's Latino community, bringing customers who understood the weight of second chances. His books showed steady profit, enough to support Elena and Diego while she finished her social work degree online. More importantly, the work fed something in his soul that construction never had, the satisfaction of making broken things whole again. Elena emerged from the office, laptop bag slung over her shoulder, ready for her internship at the county's Victim Services Department. She'd found her calling in helping other survivors navigate the legal system, using her experience to guide families through the maze of justice. The federal prosecutor had called her the most effective witness advocate they'd ever worked with. "Mrs. Patterson is bringing her Honda in this afternoon," Elena said, kissing Marcus on the cheek before scooping up Diego. She specifically asked for the mechanic who knows about starting over. Marcus smiled. Word traveled fast in small communities, and his story had become something of a local legend. The former gang member who'd helped bring down a trafficking ring, the man who'd taken a bullet to protect a pregnant woman, the mechanic who'd turned the Hell Rider's old garage into a place of honest work. People came not just for automotive repair, but for proof that transformation was possible. The bell above the office door chimed, and Agent Torres walked in, looking more relaxed than Marcus had ever seen him. The federal investigation had made Torres's career. 3 major trafficking convictions, dozens of victims freed, an entire network dismantled. But he still checked in regularly, drawn by the unlikely friendship that had formed during those intense months of testimony and trials. "How's retirement treating you?" Marcus asked, wiping his hands on a clean rag. "Better than 20 years of chasing criminals," Torres replied, accepting the cup of coffee Elena offered. "Though I'm considering teaching at the FBI Academy. Turns out our case is being used as a training module for complex trafficking investigations." Diego tugged on Torres's pant leg, demanding attention with the imperious confidence of a well-loved child. Torres lifted him up, marveling as always at how light and alive the boy felt after years of working cases that didn't end so hopefully. "Any word from Tommy?" Elena asked, settling into one of the office chairs they'd arranged for visitors who often stayed longer than their cars required. "Released last month," Torres said. "He's working construction in Oregon, staying clean, attending counseling. The prosecutors say his cooperation was essential in shutting down the remaining network operations." Marcus felt the familiar complex mix of emotions when Tommy's name came up. Forgiveness had come slowly, built on understanding rather than absolution. Tommy had been broken by the same system that had nearly destroyed Marcus. The difference was that Marcus had found Elena, had found a reason to climb out of the darkness instead of surrendering to it. "I've been thinking about visiting him," Marcus said quietly. "Not to forgive or condemn, just to show him that people can build new lives after doing terrible things." Elena's hand found his, a gesture that still filled him with wonder after 3 years together. Their relationship had grown carefully, built on shared trauma transformed into shared purpose. They'd married quietly 6 months ago, with Diego as ring bearer and Maria as maid of honor, in a small ceremony that felt like a declaration of hope rather than just love. The morning passed in comfortable routine. Marcus diagnosed a transmission problem, ordered parts for an engine rebuild, and scheduled appointments for the following week. Elena left for her internship, reminding him that they had dinner plans with Maria that evening, another small miracle of healing. As afternoon settled over the desert, Marcus found himself thinking about Diego Santos Rodriguez, the brother whose evidence had made everything possible. The man who died believing in justice even when surrounded by corruption. His picture hung in the garage office now, not as a shrine to the dead, but as a reminder that courage could outlive the people who embodied it. Diego's son would grow up knowing his father's real story, not the gang member who'd been murdered, but the undercover hero who'd sacrificed everything to protect innocence. The boy would inherit more than his father's name. He'd inherit proof that even the darkest places could be transformed by love and truth. As the sun set over Bakersfield, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus locked up the garage and headed home to the small house they'd bought near Maria's neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new problems to solve, new opportunities to prove that second chances were real. He was no longer Tank Rodriguez, the Hell Rider haunted by guilt. He was Marcus Rodriguez, mechanic and husband and uncle, a man who'd learned that redemption wasn't a destination but a daily choice to build something better from the wreckage of the past. The desert wine no longer whispered of exile and regret, but of infinite possibilities stretching toward tomorrow's horizon.